Hey folks, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant with you for the afternoon session. Katie Smith is here. Michael Troiano will join us from Las Vegas as well. First time back since last week because of the holiday. So come on, my producer, you know what that means. Retraining. So bear with me here. We are right in the midst of one heck of a trial out of Ohio. The case against Skylar Richardson, accused of killing her newborn Annabelle. The charges against this woman and the facts that are being laid out by the prosecution. She's charged with aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, endangering a child, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. You know, at this point in the process, you would think, boy, this is, slam dunk for the prosecution. They're well into their case, maybe getting near the end, but, by all accounts, it's not looking that great for prosecution. And the key seems to be, A, the inability to prove how the child died or when the child died. If stillborn, as the defense suggests, then where does murder and manslaughter come into the mix? So we're going to talk about all of this in some great detail. The court is on a break right now. So what we're going to do is play for you a little bit of what has been critical in this case, and that is the interview between the police and Skylar Richardson. She's talked to them twice. One has been played for the jury. The second may come this afternoon. But listen to some of her detail about the time she gave birth. Skylar Richardson in her first interview with the cops, which lasted hours, and she's talking about having given birth to this little baby in the middle of the night in May of 2017. So I have here on the set a little help, not just with Katie Smith, but part of the testimony has been that this baby suffered some fractures to the parietal regions of the skull, that the skull was really in pieces. And so I'm just trying to evaluate this from maybe a defense perspective. If she is on the toilet, as she suggests when she was giving birth, and she says she grabbed the baby's head as the baby first came out, that could, baby's skull, very soft, very malleable. But even if it slipped and maybe fell to the floor and the head hit the bathroom floor, seems to me those are at least two reasonable, not criminal, excuses for what fractures might have been caused. What do you think?
I think so. I think listen, without the exact way that those injuries happened, it's really hard to say that the person intended them to happen. I mean, there are many ways that this child could accidentally have been injured.
And so let me ask you, Michael, we know the defense doesn't have the burden here. We understand that, but the jury kind of loves to know what the heck happened here. They're going to fill in the blanks. In your experience, is that true?
Absolutely. The defense doesn't have that burden, but in this emotional, highly emotional case, if you will, the defense is going to need to explain away exactly what happened and why she behaved in such a manner that she did. It seems normal on its face that a girl that young would have issues in hiding her pregnancy, especially when you watch the interrogation video portion where her parents come in, very inappropriate, the way in which they interacted with their daughter based upon that recent news. And I think that they need to lay out their version of the story in order to be successful and render a not guilty verdict.
Yeah, and you mentioned the parents. Believe me, we're going to talk about them coming up. And come on, my producer reminds me that some of the testimony suggested any injuries to the skull were post-mortem. That also helps make my point. If the baby was stillborn and landed on the bathroom floor or was somehow manipulated after being stillborn, that explains away any of those fractures. I don't think the only excuse would be some sort of violence, which is what one of the experts has suggested, homicidal violence as the cause of death. So after this happens in the middle of the night in this May 2017 bathroom, what does the defendant do? Well, she buries this child or the remains, depending on which side you believe. Let's listen to her part of that interrogation. We learn so much from these type of interviews and the videos because sometimes it's the only thing the jury will see from the defendant directly. And I think of this one and I compare it to like Ashley MacArthur from the trial we did just more recently. Totally different demeanor of the suspect at the time. This girl looks broken already. Michael Troiano, give me your take on how she's reacting to being in this little room and being grilled.
I think she's coming off as what you would expect a young lady at her age and having a dead child in the back of her yard, if you will. And again, not to go back to it, I know we're going to address it again later, but at first she doesn't come off as what I would seem as believable. But once you realize the kind of lifestyle she had and parents and the way that they interact with her, when you complete that portion of the story, I think it shows the jury that she is being credible and potentially telling the truth.
Katie, when you see this first interaction she has with the police, she's traumatized. And the jury sees this, and then they see her sitting there. She's shaking in the courtroom quite often when they went through some of the gruesome, remains photos. How important is that?
It's important, and I'm looking at this in devoid of any other, just looking at this video. And I can't tell if she's overreacting, putting it on, if it's 100% authentic, if she's scared to be interviewed by police. Sometimes it's hard to tell why the person is so upset, but she certainly seems to be upset.
Yeah, I mean, if she were caught, she would be very upset
Right.
as well. So that's a very good point. So we're trying to nail down some of the details here with this doctor. Again, this is the doctor, Dr. Brady, who saw the defendant while she was pregnant, and then after the fact. So he's giving kind of a treating physician opinion as well as blending in a little expert opinion. I'm getting am I hearing he didn't treat her? I could have sworn I looked up that he did. Okay, so what we're getting is pure good old-fashioned expert opinion here, and the judge has already suggested to this jury, hey, an expert might be asked questions that the attorney provides information for. It's called a hypothetical, and the objection would be incomplete hypothetical. Katie Smith, how important is that for the jury to understand that, this guy's being fed information to lead to some of the answers?
Well, that's the thing. The objection before made sense because the question wasn't properly phrased. It was almost as though they were getting him to admit that certain facts that weren't in evidence were in fact true, when in reality they were trying to give him to, extrapolate in a hypothetical. It's important to get that hypothetical expert testimony in there, but it's also very important that the judge made that curative instruction so the jury knows when it comes to facts, that's their job.
Something also important, Michael Troiano, and it came in early with this witness when he said he testifies most often for the defense, but I don't think the jury understands. It makes them think, oh, wow, in criminal cases, I'll bet you he's talking about civil cases. In wrongful death civil cases, cases we inartfully call bad baby cases in the civil world. So that would make more sense. He'd be in there to defend doctors and things of that sort. Does that make sense to you, Michael?
Absolutely, and I think that's something that needs to be clarified so that the jury doesn't look at him as a tainted witness. I use that a lot in my practice on the defense side, and I typically ask experts for the prosecution how often that they do cases on both sides. And when I'm fortunate enough to have someone where it's almost 99 or 100% where they're working exclusively with the state or government, then I hone in on that point to the jury to basically accuse them or imply that they're a biased witness.
Of course, and I think the best answer really from the jury's perspective is 50-50. I do about 50-50. Okay, the doctor's looking through some documents there. Let's go back in and see if there's some testimony to support those documents. There you see the prosecution's key point there. And Michael Troiano in Vegas, this intrauterine growth restriction is huge. Tell us why that's so important and why he's focusing on the gestation period.
Well, the main crime here is obviously going to be the murder of the child, which could put the defendant in prison for the rest of her life. And if they can prove that, in fact, the child was stillborn at the birth, then that's going to relieve that massive burden that the defense is concerned about regarding the potential prison time for her client. And basically, to bring in briefly in the layman's terms what the doctor is trying to discuss and where the debate is between the prosecution and the defense is trying to claim that since the physical tape measurement of her stomach while pregnant measured at 32 weeks, and in fact she was more like 37 weeks, that's showing that the baby was not growing appropriately and therefore was likely stillborn at birth. But what the follow-up to this was, and what the prosecution is going to be honing in on, is that there was not an updated ultrasound which actually can confirm, in fact, the size of the child. It's very common with younger, fit, petite women during pregnancy, especially their first pregnancy, to have a smaller belly size than what they would deem to be appropriate, but the child is still growing at the appropriate levels. And that's what the big deal was as far as that doctor's specific testimony here.
So, Katie, before we go back in the crosses at the beginning there, how critical is it then, the fact that from April 26 to when she gave birth, she didn't see anybody, no health care professionals, nobody monitoring her food, nothing?
Right. I mean, there's really, as you heard him say, there's really no objective evidence to say whether or not this child was having any type of growth restrictions, whether the child was actually born viable or dead before the child was born.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. As you can see, the cross is just beginning. And if you were here this morning, get ready for fireworks on this cross by the defense team. We'll come right back to Law&Crime.